So it's my job to introduce you guys to Pete. Pete has over 17 years in relations with the Sorinex family and Pops and Bert themselves, which is pretty impressive. He is the owner of Bommarito Performance Systems and Bommarito University in South Florida. He is recognized as one of the top NFL combine coaches in the world. He is a speaker, coach, educator, and professor of exercise science. Pete is a self-proclaimed simple man, but he understands the extreme value of consistent and intentional action on a daily basis is how you produce extraordinary results. And with that, I introduce you guys Pete Bommarito.
All right, thanks. So support system preparation, we define as a section of the body. So we kind of got away from warm-ups. We started devaluing the warm-ups because we started looking at what's most important. And in our opinion, what we started looking at is the old way of why we warm up is to gain more mobility, gain more flexibility, loosen up the hips. Okay, and you see a lot of static stretching, active dynamic warm-ups, or whatever, that would specifically focus on those areas. So we started really looking at if the hips are tight, or if you have an asymmetry, or you have just the overall ability to just get more mobility in the hip or the ankle, whatever. We started looking at what was most important to gain what you needed. And this is not just a warm-up or a system to do before you run, before a speed. It's actually extremely effective before you lift. So we started looking at this from a different perspective when I started becoming more and more into neuromuscular therapy. I am a certified neuromuscular therapist. I have a lot of therapists on staff. We started doing global analysis. We looked at people that came in with tight hips or tight hamstrings or whatever. We started looking at the biggest gross deficiency. It really wasn't the hip. A lot of times it was down in the foot. And what we noticed was when we treated the foot, by default, the hips just opened up. It was almost like a guarding pattern in the hip that was a direct correlation from whatever deficiency was going on in the foot. And then we started looking at the joints of the toe. We started looking at the different mechanisms of the foot, like the forefoot, the rear foot, the ankle, the shin, how everything rotates up into the knee, and looking at it as a system link. So we just started calling it the same way a neuromuscular therapist would call it, and that is support system. Okay? Everything that supports your body weight, from all of the joints of the toes, into the forefoot, into the rear foot, into the ankle, into the shin, up into the knee, okay? All the different rotational and flexion extension patterns and eversion, inversion patterns that the support system has. So when we started looking at, as opposed to just looking at a deficiency and treating it, and then going into our lift or our run, we just started coming up with a global system to prepare it. Not warm it up, but prepare it. Prepare it to absorb and redirect force. You're going to absorb and redirect force whether you're running or whether you're lifting. And then as we started doing this, we started looking at our traditional standard warm-up exercises, hips, lats. And it became a lot more effective because I think we were kind of releasing the guarding patterns, okay? So having said that, that's kind of the definition of what we mean by support system preparation. We move away from the warm-up and just go to exercise that's going to accentuate that absorb and redirect force. So the main key exercise we started looking at, this isn't the first one we do, but it's probably the one that we never leave out. I would say it's probably the most important is the back dorsiflex series. And that whole concept of this, especially if you're going into a movement session, okay, is going after the gas drop, the rate limiting factor. So if you're sprinting, and it could be in a straight line, or a multi-directional movement pattern, or coming out of a change of direction. Okay, at some point, you are going to have to absorb force. Your center of mass is going to move over the base of support, which is what I call the transition, except the body weight. And then to propel you forward, you have to redirect the force. Okay, so technically your foot's going to go from a supination transition into a pronation. The muscle that controls that transition is the gas drop. And obviously, when you're sprinting or moving in any multi-directional facet, okay, you have a stretch reflex. And that muscle is a big part of the stretch reflex mechanism that happen from the time your foot hits the ground until you propel forward because of that supinate pronate mechanism. So I started looking at what accentuates the stretch reflex is stored elastic energy. So if you high-speed eccentric load, you can raise the threshold for stored elastic energy specifically in that muscle group. We just started looking at drills, not to warm it up, not to stretch it, but to get it ready for force. So the back dorsiflex series, and we're moving backwards obviously because we want to eccentric load that specific tissue. If I'm moving backwards, I take 2 steps, then I hit it down and pause. And we just do it in a series of different speeds, different angles for distance. So just imagine I've got, 20, 30 yards, and I just take 2 steps, hit it down. 2 steps, hit down. And then you could also go into like a jog into it, where you're going a couple steps down and pause. A couple steps down and pause. So realistically, you're pushing yourself forward. Gravity plus your body weight plus your momentum of moving backwards is pushing you backwards. So you are fighting that force, hence you are eccentrically loading that specific muscle group. Okay? Now if you think about the mechanism of what you're trying to do, what is your intention in that gait pattern? So as soon as my foot leaves the ground, my intention is to pull the big toe to the top of the shoe and keep that isometric contraction all the way through that gait and continue to keep it until I come here. Because remember, gravity's pushing me this way into plantar flexion. Momentum of how fast I move is pushing me that way, hence it's pushing me into plantar flexion. I am resisting it by isometrically contracting into dorsiflexion. And the big toe is obviously a big part of that, And I even teach my younger coaches, don't specifically think about muscles. If you understand anatomy, great. You know that there's a muscle that crosses the big toe that also crosses the ankle. It specifically is designed to extend the big toe and dorsiflex the ankle. So hence, if you just look at the basic neuromuscular positioning, if you lift the big toe, hence extend the big toe at that joint, you will dorsiflex more efficiently. So if you're dorsiflexing more efficiently, you're holding a better isometric hold, it's going to fight that force at greater speeds. So the faster you move, the more gravity and momentum is trying to push you into plantar flexion. The more you resist it, the more you're eccentrically loading your plantar flexion, specifically that gastroc. So the back dorsiflex series is specifically what we call the drill, specifically for absorption of force. Okay? When I say the foundation for raising threshold, again, that all goes back to stored elastic energy. And when I say slow to dynamic, again, we start off slow because you got to look at somebody's ability to absorb that force. If their ability in terms of how much they can load that tissue is only in slow motion, just keep repeating the slow motion. But that is going to respond quick. So within a given microcycle of a series over time, or just that workout, you can continue just to speed up that drill. So hence, the back dorsiflex series is really what we call the rate limiting factor because it lays the foundation of that eccentric load. Now obviously we want to do this in a multi-directional fashion because when you accelerate forward, if I'm coming out of a change direction, I'm going this way, I still have that stretch reflex, I just have it in a different position of my ankle. If I'm cutting that way, my ankle is in an inverted state. If I'm going off my right foot cutting this way, it's in an everted state. So we'll still do the same thing where I'll kind of walk on an angle because if I'm coming here, I'm still loading eccentrically into that tissue. But if I'm going this way and I step and load, it's in an everted position that I'm loading that eccentrically. Okay? So that's again what we call the rate limiting factor. Now, I already talked about the multiple speeds, it just increases the challenge. So we do actually plan this out. If I have a microcycle of 8 weeks, we will plan it out in terms of what type of speed we're going to be doing this back dorsiflex series. Now, some people are going to be able to respond quicker. We will just move them at faster speed. So if we just segment out within the given preparation system, we're going to do the back dorsiflex series for 2 to 3 minutes. Within 2 to 3 minutes, we'll get as many reps as we can and try to increase the speed individually for each person, okay? Then obviously, again, the multiple angles is just either in an everted or inverted position, okay? And then the function integration goes back again to the toe, ankle, and knee. So 2 things. The one obvious is Isometrically, and your intention of lifting the toe will lead to more efficient dorsiflexion. That's the easy, obvious one that you can see because we know what muscles cross the joints. The other part of it is the knee because of the positioning. So if you just think about, again, the toe, and the reason why this is so effective, and especially at those slow-moving positions, why it's so effective to have the intention of extending the toe. If you reposition this, it will also cause more efficient knee flexion. Again, you just go back to basic anatomy. What muscle crosses the ankle and the knee? The gastroc. So if you're changing the position of the gastroc, by default, you're efficiently causing more knee flexion. So lifting the big toe helps with dorsiflexion. If you are dorsiflexing the ankle, that is the opposing force of what the gastroc does. By default, because the gastroc also crosses the knee, and you change the position of the ankle, you're going to make knee flexion more efficient. And just because of the relation of where the knee is now to the hip, it's obviously going to cause more hip flexion. Yeah, you could conclude all this by saying big toe function will lead to more efficient hip flexion, which will reduce residual phase and increase everybody's movement skills in itself. But the most important thing is, once you're coming from that pronate to supinate into the toe off, it makes it a lot more efficient. So I always think that if there's a coaching cue you give, you really overload the intention of what the toe does, especially when you're in these preparation systems and you're slow moving, you can really focus on it, okay? Now, in terms of the specificity, obviously it's the stretch reflex because the rate limiting factor of the gastroc, okay? So we're always talking about ground contact phase. Now this has been studied. The great thing about this is there is loads and loads of data of what is the rate limiting factor for speed. Now we're taking ourselves out of the weight room a little bit and just focusing on movement mechanics. Now this has been studied extensively in terms of if you look at elite track athletes, for example, versus regular high school athletes. There's tons of studies that show that the force is actually fairly equivalent. So even some of the best sprinters in the world produce just enough amount of force, but the force is equal to an average track person in high school, which is kind of surprising. But the main difference is they produce that force in a very, very limited amount of time. So if you can produce the same force in a shorter amount of time, your rate of force development goes up, which is the rate limiting factor for movement. So obviously our job as performance coaches is to not necessarily always just train for force, but train for force in a limited amount of time. How do you get the foot off the ground quicker? You go from that supinate, transition accepting body weight to redirecting force of toe off quicker. That supinate to pronate, the faster it happens, the more force you're going to be able to produce in a limited amount of time. Okay, again, this is not just theory, this is data. This is actual data that's been collected and proven in a laboratory setting over and over. So all we have to do is look at what produces that motion quicker, and hence the function of the gastroc and the high-speed eccentric loading will definitely play a key role in that. Okay? So the other thing is just the functional range. Okay? So again, getting into neuromuscular therapy, I started looking not necessarily at putting stretches across tissue, but putting activation across opposing tissues. So a huge issue is trying to increase the range of motion in the ankle. And this takes us back into the weight room, okay? Whether it's double leg squat, Olympic motion, single leg squat, your ability to not only have good range of motion at the ankle and the foot, but functional range, meaning you can control it, is crucial to your success as a lifter. Okay, and again, it doesn't matter what type of lift you do. You could take a double leg squat, an Olympic squat, a powerlifting wide leg squat. You could take a Bulgarian squat, a split squat. A lot of the strength application is going to depend on your functional range of motion. So not necessarily how much range of motion you have, but how much range of motion can you control, okay, with high levels of force going into those extreme ranges. So it's easy to see when you're looking at like the hip. Like the functional movement screen does a good job of doing an active straight leg raise, okay? And we know that if you do an active straight leg raise, you're looking at different asymmetries. And if you just do an isometric contraction into flexion, as opposed to stretching the hamstring, you can increase range of motion a lot quicker. It's easy to see with the long lever of the hip, okay? It's very, very easy to see that. So just think about that lever of the hip, the moment arm, of the leg and put that exact concept onto the small joints of the toe and the forefoot, which is exactly what we're doing. So hence, in my opinion, the more isometric contractions you can do into the end range of motion you can control will increase that range. So if you're constantly having the intention to focus on the joints of the toe, you will open up the range of motion in the ankle, which again is not just a warm-up for a speed, even though it looks like that. We do these sequences a lot of times even before we go in and we lift, especially if we have max effort lifting days. We've got to make sure the joints are set, the asymmetries are released, and we can put maximal power onto our squat motions, okay? Hence was why I keep talking about control. It's not just about flexibility, it's about how much flexibility range can you control. Okay, now, reverting back in terms of initiation. So a lot of times, as I said, we don't necessarily start with the back dorsiflex series. We will start with a basic foundation. So we do two things. We do motions and we do isometrics, okay? And again, the isometrics goes back to that same big toe intention concept. So we will just go through everything that the support system does. Like a heel to toe raise will be the obvious ones, focusing on dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, okay? We'll go through ankle circles, but we're over-exaggerating. So we'll over-exaggerate inversion. Inversion plus plantar flexion, eversion plus plantar flexion, eversion. We'll go around the circle, but really overemphasize isometric contractions at every range, every position. That's the obvious stuff, okay? But then we'll start to do different patterns. So you also have plantar flexion, dorsiflexion in a rotated position. So the tibia will internally and externally rotate. So as opposed to always just keeping a neutral tibial position, we could do the same thing with tibial external rotation. Now, obviously, my hips are externally rotated too, but in this position, I'm still forcing, and you can even feel this. If I'm standing here without any intention, my hips are externally rotated. If I push out, but my feet don't move, you can actually feel the contraction up in the tibia. The tibia does rotate. So keeping those isometrics here, then isometrics of dorsiflexion, plantar flexion in the tibial externally rotated. Then you internally rotate the hip. You can think of the same concept. My hips are internally rotated right now, but if my intention is to push my feet in, again, I can feel my hip, but I can also feel the shin. So we'll do a lot of heel to toe raises here. So if I'm even going in a position, I might go to a heel to toe walk. This will just go basic dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, or I could go in an angle. So if I go in an angle, I'm going this way, I'm going to step, I'm slightly in eversion, I go dorsiflex, plantar flexion, I toe off into inversion, okay? And so we do heel to toe walks even on an angle. So especially if we're gonna do a movement session, okay? Let's go shift back out of the weight room into the movement section. If I have a multi-directional day plan, I might do a lot of those angled heel to toe walks in different positions, okay? So that's just the motion. Just get into the different planes of motion of what you can control and do slight isometric pauses just to lay the foundation for getting into an effective back dorsiflex series, okay? Then we also get into pause and reflex, where I'll dorsiflex pause, plantar flex pause, or I'll just start to get into slight reflexes. So sometimes we do those motions with a slight pause. After we raise the threshold of that eccentric load, then we'll start getting into a little more dynamic motions, okay? What's that? Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we'll even do stuff like, even on a field in a weight room, we have stuff like this, where we could just stand on the edge of something. You could just do really, really basic exercise. Let's just say a dumbbell hammer curl. I'm talking about with like 5 pounds. I'm just trying to create some momentum of swinging back and forth. But if I do this and I actually do not drop my toes down, gravity wants to push me in a plantar flexion. I am isometrically contracting in a dorsiflexion. But you are over-exaggerating the toe function of that. So pulling the big toe up and doing this, or even doing that. Just take a real basic pattern of any arm motion you do, just standing on 2x4s will over-exaggerate that isometric contraction. That's a good point. Okay, so then we get into isometrics, and we hold the isometric. So as opposed to just doing like a 1 second position into the end range of motion you can control, you could just hold it. So what we call as a heel walk is we'll just get up into dorsiflexion, obviously locking the knees, which completely puts the emphasis on the ankle and the toe. Over-exaggerate that toe-up position, and then without bending the knees, just go into heel walks. Or going to plantar flexion. That's my end range of motion of what I can control, plantar flexion. And again, keeping the knees locked. Not only am I plantar flexing, I'm plantar flexing and crashing down onto an eccentric load of that specific tissue. Okay? Or we just go on an angle. So I'll take that same heel walk and then cross over, because again, I'm going inversion, eversion, inversion, eversion, in the maximally dorsiflex toe extended position with an isometric contraction. So a lot of times we will initiate and end a lot of our sessions with that. So we initiate, prepare it, then once we get into especially a max effort lift or one of those endurance type dynamic lifts, we're doing a lot of dynamic motions, short rest periods with lots and lots of sets. We will actually end our sessions with those types of isometrics. It's kind of like a cool down to reset all the tissue. Okay? So that's the basic in terms of heel walks, toe walks, having the inversion, eversion, different positions. Now you can really get specific. And we used to do this as a corrective exercise, especially with somebody with very, very limited toe function. We're talking about somebody that's had a lot of abuse, like a running back in football is a good example, whether it had turf toe or not. They have bruising in there, okay? Or young kids that are growing fast. A lot of times when their feet grow, you ever watch a kid just hit their growth spurt, their feet grow first and then they grow, okay? They have very, very limited toe functions. We used to use it as an exercise to help with that toe function. It's called the TKMAT position. We labeled it that because I kept getting assigned this exercise by MAT therapists, which is a very specific form of neuromuscular therapy. It became so effective, we just use it as a drill. In our opinion, don't wait for the toe to be dysfunctional, just attack it and continue to get better. Even if it's not an asymmetry, it's not like it's going to be detrimental to get better and better toe function, even if you don't have an asymmetry. So what this position is you go against the wall or a platform or a dumbbell rack, whatever, and you just get into an acceleration position. And again, this is great to precede like a hardcore resisted acceleration day. But this is so effective, it's almost like a standard of ours before we squat, especially heavy loaded squats. We have to have optimal function. I don't have time to get evaluated by a therapist. We just got to make sure the asymmetries are there. So especially bigger guys, stronger guys, experienced lifters, that style population, when we have a true max effort day, you want to be sure. So this has almost become a standard part of our preparing to load squat. As you get into position, and first off, we'll just set full extension. Then we come down without lifting the heel. You try to bend the knee and dorsiflex as much as you can, keeping the heel on the ground. Eventually, obviously, you're going to feel a pretty intense stretch through the gastrosoleus complex. What you want to do is slightly come out of that stretch, just slightly come out of it until you don't feel that tension. Then in this not maximally dorsiflex position, but extreme dorsiflex position, then lift the big toe to the top of the shoe and do 6-second light isometrics. Again, you're focusing on the toe, but if you get in that position, you will feel everything in your shin blow up and almost cramp. It's an extremely, extremely intense fatiguing exercise, okay? So we started doing it again initially as a corrective, but it got assigned to so many people, we were just like, this is an exercise. We're never gonna take this out. We do it almost every single load squat day, okay? So that's what I mean by the TKMAT position. Again, you could always go multiple angles and speeds. So sometimes we will go really, really slow with it. And then sometimes we'll focus, continue on the isometric, but the isometric with a little bit of a different overload on that eccentric force upon when your heel hits the ground. Okay, so the functional range of motion versus the range of motion. Again, we're going back to, we talked about the flexibility and the mobility, what the definition is, okay? Now we come back into the symmetry and do isometric contractions at the end range, okay? And again, It's easy to see it on a long lever, okay? Actually, it would be easier for me just to demonstrate it. Jason, you want to come up here? I'm going to use Jason, my general manager, so you guys can see the levers. So many times when especially when I'm teaching my young coaches, interns, whatever, this concept, we do it with the lever that they can see. And then, even with an athlete, a lot of times athletes have problems isometrically contracting at small joints. What we want them to do is just get the concept of what a true isometric is without a compensation, okay? So the reason why I use this is because I know a lot of people have taken the functional movement screen, and it's a good screen. The active straight leg raise is one of the easier ones to do. Just think about exactly what you're trying to do and look at the axis of rotation. If you look at the body as a physics problem, where's my axis of rotation? It's at the hip. Where's my moment arm? It's fairly significant. And then what are we fighting? The weight of the leg and gravity, which is the force. So you have an axis of rotation, you have a moment arm, and you have a force angle. And the force angle is the weight plus gravity. So with the functional, let's just go to the functional movement screen because I know a lot of people have seen this before. You push the left leg down as hard as you can. Just imagine that there's the board there. You keep isometrically contracting into hip extension on the left side as you bring this up into flexion. So if we were going to just evaluate, let's just say, I have the stick and I'm doing the test and he's 1 inch below the kneecap, right? Now we press down here on the right side, right hip is going into isometric contraction. We bring the left side up, okay? Now obviously, it doesn't take a physical therapist to see that there's an asymmetry. And a lot of people have these slight asymmetries. So again, if you lift this up, notice that the range of motion here, if I actually have the pole and do the test, he's about 1 inch or 2 above the kneecap. Okay, so you could see that this is more limited than this. Okay, the left side has a range of motion about here, the right side has a range of motion about there. Okay, so the first thing is when he lifts it up, he probably feels tension in the hamstring. The first thought pattern is, let's foam roll this tissue, let's stretch this tissue. And I'm not saying that's bad. What I always say is, why don't you just look at an activation pattern first to see if that changes it. If it doesn't change it, maybe they do need some fascial work. If it does change it, it's neurological. So let's just take the affected side, go to the end range of motion we know he can control. With lifting his limb, it's right about here. So I'm just going to hold my position there. I'm not stretching him. Just relax your leg completely. Let it fall to my arm. Okay? So I'm not stretching him at all. I'm just taking and releasing the force of gravity. Now if I take him and tell him right where my fingers are tapping, very slowly push into my fingers, very slowly. We're just going to do a really light isometric contraction, 6 seconds, release. I'm going to hold in the exact same position and contract again. Very lightly, just do basic 6-second contractions. You can even have the athlete just lay on his back and put the foot on a bench or on a chair or whatever, okay? The main thing is do an isometric contraction. He's not even taking his foot off my hand or the bench or the chair, whatever you have here. All I did right now is I did 4, let's do one more, very light 6-second isometric contractions. So now he probably doesn't feel the stretch in the hamstring, he feels the contraction here. Let's go back to the exact same test, lift the leg again, and you notice that now it's almost exactly symmetrical. So lift the leg again and hold. Now the ankle joint is 1 inch above the knee. So we didn't do any magical stretching, fascial release or whatever. All we did was a lightweight isometric tension. So that's easy to see with long levers because this is the axis, that entire leg is my moment arm. So he can feel the contraction. It teaches him the intention of what a light-based isometric is. All we did was we just played with the proprioceptors in the afferent efferent system. We stimulated the nervous system to be able to contract in a range that he could not control. We do very light-based neuromuscular contractions. Now he can control a new range. If you can control a new range neurologically, the body is going to release that guarding pattern and allow you to functionally move in the range. So I always start with a basic thing like that so people can see it and athletes and clients can feel it. Now when you go into a complicated exercise like this, they understand Just don't try to contract and lift weights in a position. The lighter, the better. You're just stimulating the nervous system. You are not strengthening anything. You're improving the ability to contract. Once you improve the ability to contract, then you can load it. Then you can squat. Okay? Now the tissue is ready for an external load. Don't external load before you even get better at contraction. Again, if you have a neuromuscular therapy background, you can get really specific. You can go joint by joint and assign a very specific exercise. We all know, as strength coaches and trainers, it's just not a reality. A lot of times they have large groups, got to move quick. So what we started doing is looking at gross patterns that is deficient in almost everybody and focusing on that as a preparation system and eliminating the warm-up. I'm not saying warm-up is bad, but on the scale of importance, it's definitely down there. Ability to absorb force, accept body weight, redirect force, to me, is a lot more prominent than elevating tissue temperature. Okay? If you just do the system, and let's say you go back dorsiflex series, jog recovery, back dorsiflex series, jog recovery. The jog recovery is applying the new threshold that you built. Hence, continue to keep that threshold high. Now, as a default, you will raise tissue temperature. So I think people just need to change the pattern of do something that's effective at absorbing, redirecting force. By default, you will raise tissue temperature. But a lot of times people just try to get a good sweat to warm up. Is that even really necessary? Not really. I mean, it plays a small part of an elevated tissue temperature at this absorption of force, but the actual position is a lot more important. So I always try to emphasize the coaches, focus on the position. By default, you will start to sweat and start to raise the temperature, okay? So that's what I mean by a controllable motion into the motion. We want to get better at hip flexion. We are contracting our hip flexors, not always looking at what feels tight and attacking that. And you have to think of the same thing in the toe and the foot. And that's where I started actually, sometimes I'll lay my group down and do that whole straight leg raise thing. They'll be kind of amazed that, wow, yeah, this felt tight before, now it doesn't feel tight. Okay, it's easy to feel, it's easy to see. And then start to keep referring to that sensation that they did with the straight leg raise and start to go with the functions of the toe and dorsiflexion and plantar flexion and inversion and eversion and everything like that. You know, another thing we do even in the weight room, especially if we're going to load squat, okay, especially if it's a bigger guy that is experienced and can easily compensate. We will just put them on a bench, have their legs straight. Let's say that I'm on a bench here, and the bench ends about right there. So the only thing suspended off the end of the bench is my foot. Just with everything completely inactive, the only thing moving is just have them do very, very basic motions of inversion or eversion, get to the end range, put your hand there, and have them contract into a range. So they're not resisting your push. You're functioning as a wall, and they're pushing into your wall. Again, it's not something where they're trying to overload max strength. It is a contractile force. So believe me, it's teaching the intention of the sensation, which will get this effective. Okay? What's that? Yeah, I mean, the question is, will that prevent ankle injuries? So again, if you just look at why a tissue would get injured. If I am sprinting, and I'm a good athlete, and I've got great body awareness, and the angle with which I have to change directions is a certain position in order for me to be effective. Let's just say that I can do it because I got great athleticism and body awareness, but I don't have the ability to absorb and redirect that force. If you put a force on tissue, and that tissue does not have the ability to accept and redirect that extreme force you're putting on it, you're susceptible to injury. So the long answer is yes, of course. Now, this is not the only thing you do, obviously. Again, this is just getting things that contract better. If you get it to contract better and you never load it with external forces like lifting weights, then you're still susceptible. But our job is to continue to raise the threshold of each link in the system to make the system more effective. And then you're just going to naturally notice them by default changing directions more efficiently and lower. And most importantly, having the ability and the threshold to absorb and redirect that extreme force you're going to see in sport. Okay, and this is even worse with pro athletes because they can compensate great. Okay, if they have an asymmetry Most regular people at asymmetry would just slow down or change directions worse. Pro athletes will just compensate subconsciously. That's what makes them great athletes. Now, if you continue to do that, that's what gets them through the game or gets them through the first part of the season. But if you don't correct it, yes, they're going to put undue stress on that tissue, and eventually it's going to go. Okay? Compensation is necessary for them to actually be effective. It's not a bad thing. We just have to constantly reset that asymmetry, and this is some of the stuff that we do. We go out and do like a full team warm-up for a football team, a baseball team, volleyball team, whatever. This is the exact first sequence that we do. When we get young kids, we don't even focus on stretching warm-ups. We do stuff like this nonstop. We focus on trunk isometrics, support system isometrics. We barely even touch the hips, and their hips just naturally, by default, get more effective. Because the main thing about a growing kid has nothing to do with flexibility. They start getting tight because of the compensation pattern. If you start to really overload and plan out how to micro-progress that support system, their hips will get looser and more effective, again, by default. Okay? So, as I said, we did the example of straight leg raise. You take the same sensation concept into all of the joints and all the muscles that cross every joint throughout that support system. Okay? So now, we've got accepting body weight. Okay? One of the drills we do for accepting body weight is called the back low walk sequence. So again, go back to the definition of what's going to propel me forward. If I am striking, I'm going supinate, accept, pronate, toe off. Then I have residual phase, which I'm trying to eliminate if I'm effective enough at that triple flexor response. Then I get into the gait pattern forward. So we're looking at a couple of things here. That transition of the moment you start going from supinate to pronate is controlled by the gastroc. Okay, and again, that is not theory, that is proven in research and literature. It's a great thing about it. All we have to do is figure out how to make the gastroc more effective. So how do you accept body weight? So I started looking at extreme levels of a dorsiflex position and holding the body weight as soon as the base support moves over the center of mass. So let's say I'm getting into my back low walk position. I have my hands on my hips, and I'm going to step backwards and then reset here. In slow motion, if you watch what I'm doing, I am still actively toe extending isometrically. I'm still actively dorsiflexing isometrically. As soon as I hit that position where my foot hits the ground, now I am continuing to isometrically contract, but notice the extreme positions I'm at the toe joints, not just one joint, but the multiple joints of the toe up into the forefoot. And then there's a split second where my entire body weight is supported by my right foot, and then I come back down. That is a basic form of accepting body weight. If I don't accept the body weight, I'm going to continue to go backwards and fall over. But I'm accepting my body weight in a dorsiflex toe extended forefoot extreme position, which is very specific to the eccentric load you want to get the stretch reflex that's going to propel you forward. So that's the basic level. How do you advance it? You just take your entire body weight and put it over that position when you accept the body weight. So as opposed to just doing this at the basic level, I might do this at an advanced level. Now, how do you, again, raise the threshold of that eccentric load? You speed it up. So as opposed to stepping and recovering, I might jump into the recovery, okay? So you just keep increasing distance, you keep increasing speed, and you keep increasing the position of, is all my body weight supported with 2 feet, or is all my body weight supported with 1 feet? Then we start getting into slow back pedal motions. Not necessarily a back pedal, but overemphasizing the position. So the bend. You're never going to back pedal in this position right here, but if you go through an actual back pedal motion, you're just putting that forefoot in an extreme range, which is forcing a threshold to raise that eccentric load, or hence raise stored elastic energy to make that position more effective. So that's why we go backwards, because when you propel forward, that supinate, accept, pronate is very, very quick, and it's got to happen fast. Don't recreate the motion, just get the muscle better with more stored elastic energy, and it's going to be more effective by default, okay? Again, why I used to watch everybody that's fast. If you ever trained a professional track athlete, what's the one thing that's different about their body? They all have flat feet. All of it. Everybody that's really fast, watch their foot. Don't change it. Don't put an orthotic in it. It needs to be flat. It's what makes them fast. Why does it make them fast? Because if they have a limited arch and they can control it, that supinate to pronate is going to happen faster by default because they have less distance to travel from the ground when the arch collapses. The question isn't, do they have flat feet? The question is, can they control the transition? If they can control the transition, you're not going to tug in that plantar fascia, you're not going to have foot problems. So too many people look at a flat foot and automatically by default try to change it because it looks flat. But if you just make it more effective and understand the muscle that controls the transition, you will not only have less pain, you'll be a lot more effective, okay? So hence, again, the dynamic and the genetics, somebody went through a lot of genetics yesterday. It was a great talk about genetics. The genetics is their bodies are built for maximum speed, okay? So increase the speeds, increase the challenge. Now, the challenge equals the time of accepting and stabilizing the body weight, okay? What I mean by that is not necessarily just the speed, but sometimes you will just do an overloaded time. So if I do a basic level, step, recover, then I do an overloaded level of step, hold, then I do an overloaded level of the jump and the hold, then I do an overloaded level of a jump and a hold. Then I try to get into a jump, 1, 2, 3, and hold, 1, 2, 3. So a lot of times, especially if you have large teams, we'll just go back and forth like that. Forget the lines, forget everything. Just overload the time. You keep accentuating height, distance, speed, which will raise the threshold continuously. And then you just keep repeating, maybe not right foot, right foot, go right foot, back into the right foot, back into the right foot. So right foot, hold. Come back, go, hold. 2, 3. Even do up to 5, 6-second contractions. So stuff like that is some of the most effective stuff you can do to prepare you of the support system into a motion without the standard warm-ups and stuff, okay? And again, the same thing about multiple angles. So if I'm doing that same back low walk concept, but I'm going on an angle. So if I have the line here, I'm keeping my hips and my shoulders square. I don't want to just turn and go, otherwise I'm doing the exact same exercise. If I stay square, meaning that in this parallel line, my shoulders are parallel, my hips are parallel. My feet are perpendicular to that line, okay? When I step and recover, I don't change the position of my foot. So if I remain perpendicular to this line and I step right, what position am I in? Look at my ankle. I'm in dorsiflexion, toe extension, forefoot extreme motion with inversion. And then if I step left, same concept, but eversion. So inversion, hold. Eversion, hold. And you can do the exact same sequence from slow motion to slow motion stabilize, to jump stabilize, to the back pedal, to the fast back pedal, and keep redirecting that force. So now we're overloading threshold, not just in the system, but in the system in an inverted position, in the system in an everted position. Okay, and again, it's not just speed. It's easy to see because you have to have those positions to change directions effectively. But believe me, if you're isometrically contracting your intention on a squat and you're contracting into abduction, whether you're in a position here, whatever your preference, whatever your belief system is in terms of how you squat, you are still causing an intention isometrically in the hip and the knee and especially the ankle when you squat. So a lot of times I've seen experienced lifters either in a position here, but before they go, by default, they just start to contract. There's a difference between standing here and doing this. Nothing moved, nothing changed. I can't see a difference. I can feel a difference. I can feel a difference in my ankle. I can feel a difference in my shin, my knee. So again, this is extremely effective stuff to do, especially when you start to get into squat patterns. When you're trying to teach intention on a squat, or you're trying to maximize an experienced lifter in those squat patterns. And it's not just set to a squat. Again, it's single leg motions, it's Olympic motions, it's jumping motions, it's jumping and landing motions. All will be more effective if you can increase that controllable range.
Okay, so now we get into redirecting force. So when I first started developing this concept, and one mistake I made is I kept jumping ahead. The one thing I kept wanting to do is get into the redirection of force. So I started looking at why some people were responding and some people weren't. I kept coming back to the conclusion that if they don't have the threshold for stored elastic energy, how can they utilize it to their maximum capabilities? You're only going to reflex and redirect a force of the threshold that you built. So the foundation is motion isometrics. The position is the back dorsiflex series of absorbing force. The transition of that pronate supinate, or just the position of your squat patterns, is the back low walk series or accepting body weight. Now we have put the pieces in place of the eccentric load to get that reflex. So if you're looking at it from a movement mechanic, okay, it's the culmination of takeoff. So what we start doing is the culmination of takeoff obviously has to involve the knee and the hip. So all we do is we take the concept and put it up the chain. We link the systems. So for example, we have a back butt kick skip series. Now when I do my skip series, whether it's going to be a drill forward for emphasizing speed mechanic, or it's a drill backwards to overload more eccentrically, I'm going to go back and focus on the toe functions. So let's say I get into a plyometric rhythm. I'm going to focus on the toe mechanics, then get into my rhythm. Now, if I just hit a quick heel flick of this position here, okay, what exactly am I doing in slow motion? Again, go back to what muscle crosses the ankle and the toe. If I lift a big toe, I will dorsiflex more effectively. What muscle crosses the ankle and the knee? The gastroc. If I dorsiflex more effectively, what's going to happen by default? Knee flexion. If I knee flex more efficiently and quicker, because of the position of where my torso is, what's going to happen to my hip? It's going to flex more effectively. So keep going back to toe mechanic leads into faster hip flexion. If you hip flex faster, what do you reduce? Residual phase. Residual phase is the moment of takeoff until that starts to happen. So you have ground contact, residual, recovery. Your goal is to reduce residual phase. How do you do that? Mechanical position, stretch reflex. This will help with both. So it's a basic drill. You're doing a basic low-grade plyometric bounce, then just taking that low-grade plyometric and getting it into an activation, but my emphasis is on the toe to make the system happen more effectively, okay? So with the skips, we've got 3 different categories. We have a rhythm individual, a rhythm continuous, and a power step. So rhythm individual is what I just demonstrated. The rhythm continuous will be the exact same concept, but I'm going to low-grade plyo hit, reflex, low-grade plyo hit, reflex. So I'm going to go continuous to get more reps in at my designated distance. So let's pretend it's 10 to 20 yards of my designated distance. I want to increase more reps. So my toes up. Again, I'm not really focusing on plantar flexion. I am actively trying to dorsiflex toe extend, but my body crashing down on it is redirecting my force. And then I just get into this pattern here, where I'm still getting that hip flexion, knee flexion, but I'm just getting more reps in. Then you overload it a little bit more and you take it into the power step. So the difference between the power step is what happens on accepting my body weight. I'm going to crash all my body weight down on 1 foot, not 2. So again, watch this in slow motion. This is rhythm continuous, where if I hit down every intermediate step, I'm hitting 2 feet at the same time. It's an easier progression because if I weigh 200 pounds, I'm redirecting 100 pounds off my right, I'm redirecting 100 pounds off my left. If I take the same concept but I suspend it in midair now I'm going to never, under any circumstance in this drill, hit my body weight down on 2 feet. It's always going to hit 1. So now I take the same concept, see how it suspends in midair, and then I just flick it. So you watch this again. When I'm bouncing on my right, my left one will just be suspended in midair. Once I activate that flexion off the right, then the left's going to crash down. I'm just going to take that support system of redirecting force. The force is my body weight plus gravity. I'm going to overload it. So this is like back butt kick skip with the power step position. Okay? So we'll plan it out in terms of progression of the day. We'll plan it out in terms of a microcycle over a period of time. We'll start with absorption of force emphasis at the beginning of the first couple of weeks of the microcycle. Then we'll move into emphasizing accepting body weight. Then we'll move into emphasizing redirection of force. Then each workout or microcycle week, we will just increase the intensity by a skip rhythm individual, skip rhythm continuous, or the power step, okay? So again, the main thing is linking the system, okay? Now, I say this with muscle action, not recreating the motion. So when you get to a level where your systems are built and you want to apply it, you recreate the motion you see in sport. There's nothing wrong with that. I say train muscles, not motions a lot, and sometimes people misunderstand it. My main thing of when I say train the muscle action, don't always recreate the motion, is the key word of always. Too many times people see how you move in sport, they recreate it in training, okay? But if the systems and the threshold isn't raised, you're doing drills for the sake of doing drills, and we're gonna get better at the motion. You wanna get better at the motion, raise the threshold, apply it to a specificity motion. Raise the threshold, apply it to it, just keep going back and forth. So even though these types of drills, like I'll go into the back reach skip, okay? This position here is the same concept, but now I'm gonna flick and reach. So you're never actually gonna see this motion in any type of sport of my torso being upright, everything here, flick and stretch and move, okay? It's not a specific motion, but it's one of the most effective exercises you can do. So again, you watch the position of my hip. My foot hits down, focus on my forefoot, okay? Focus on the position of forefoot. You see how if I flick, activate hip extensor, activate trunk stabilizer, and I hit down, you see the position of my forefoot. It's in that extreme position. Okay, so now I link the hip by putting the eccentric load across my hip flexor, which ties into that toe triple flexor response. But at the same time, when my foot hit the ground, I'm under an extreme eccentric load. So it's a progression up off the butt kick if I butt kick reach, okay? And then we get into, that's reach skip, look at the sequence. Then we get into the ultimate drill of redirecting forces, the back reach run, okay? So again, early in my career, I made the mistake of, I understood this concept, and I kept trying to hammer the drill. My thought pattern was, the more we do it, the better they'll get at it. The more I teach it, the better I get at coaching it, the more they'll do it. Again, some people got better, some people didn't. I think the one key thing I was missing was the building blocks to get the threshold of what this is actually going to do. It's going to be very difficult for me to demonstrate this, so if I run you over, I apologize. I'm going to try not to fall off the platform. But it's just this motion here where you're going heel flick and into the reach. Now, you want to get this into half speed, three-quarter speed, full speed. But the key is, don't try to recreate what you see in sport. This is not a back pedal motion. The torso should be upright, completely upright. Now, I always have coaches say, well, they don't run upright in sport. I don't want to teach them moving backwards in upright position. I'm not a position coach. I'm not a sport coach. My job is to make the muscle system better. If the torso is upright, look at the stretch reflex. So if I come here, I am flexing. If I activate my extensors, I am severely eccentrically loading my flexors. If my foot crashes down, I'm taking my entire support system and putting it under an extreme eccentric load. That's my job, get the muscles better. So if I do a back reach run, it's not going to automatically by default teach them a wrong mechanic, okay? They're going to have such a great support system when they get into a back pedal, angle pedal, weave motion, they're just going to be lower by default because I train the muscles better, okay? So again, you got to reemphasize, we are not teaching a motion. We are just overloading the muscular system. Now, once you do that, then yeah, now the threshold is raised, then get into the specificity of how they move back pedal, angle pedal. You can do it the same day. We even do supersets. We'll do back reach run for distance full speed, come back, do our back pedal, angle pedal breaks. Back reach run again, okay? And again, this is a favorite exercise of what we do before we lift, because it's the ultimate redirection of force. Now, you're not necessarily redirecting force if you're squatting, okay, in terms of the stretch reflex of the ankle, because it's not going to hit that eccentric load, obviously. But because it links the systems together in the stretch reflex so powerfully, it will open up the hip to a great degree. A lot of people ask me, how do you get the hips more mobile? I can squat the house, but I still feel tight. I think I could be more effective if I stretch. Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I work with this therapist? Progress yourself to a back reach run and continuously plan it out, do it right, do the building blocks. guarantee your hips will open up, and you'll become a lot more of an effective lifter, okay? So that's what I mean by the guarding patterns, suspension versus support. This is the ultimate link to not only overload the support, but it's going to get up into the suspension and very, very effectively. So just like we showed with that slow-moving lever when Jason came up here on the straight leg raise, okay, we're doing the same concept, but we are doing it at dynamic motions, and the squat is a dynamic motion, okay? So technically you're looking at, when we went with Jason, he did an isometric contraction of hip flexion, so it releases the guarding pattern back here. With the back reach run, we are doing a powerful contraction of the hip extensors. We're keeping our torso upright, because if the torso drops, I'm not extending my hip. I'm just changing the position. If the torso is upright, I am actively extending my hip to put the load here. So think of that concept just really fast in a crazy looking position, and that's what we're doing to increase the ability to function at the hip, okay? So once you release the guard, again, I can't stress this enough. This is only to get things that contract better and get more range of motion you can control. That's all we're doing, contracting better. Now you have to load it. So the strategy is your belief system in how you do plyometrics, how you lift, and how you do movement patterns. So sometimes we'll use this support system prep right before we get into suspension, what we call the hip suspension. So we look at the body in segments, we don't look at muscles. We look at everything that's in the support system, what's in the suspension, what's up in the trunk and spine, and we link them together. So we found to be more effective is if we're going to do what people sometimes call a warm-up, we will hit the support and then go suspension. Or we'll hit the trunk and then go to suspension. Or sometimes we'll just hit support and trunk and do a couple of suspension, that's it. Okay, that is our preparation. So sometimes we'll just do it as a 15-minute session and then go lift or then go run. And many times we get as effective as re-stimulating. So it's not uncommon for us to hit some of these exercises in between the sets of a squat. If somebody really has poor mechanics in their ankle, I don't think doing the TK MAT position, isometric contractions, or like a slow-moving back dorsiflex series is going to interfere with the recovery from set 1 to set 2 to set 3. It's actually going to make it more effective. So sometimes we actually complex our lifts with these motions, and we definitely complex our movement session with these motions. Sometimes just the stress of lifting and the stress of moving and changing directions is enough to drop that threshold. You got to re-stimulate the tissue and hit more sets. So we always think of it as not necessarily just a training drill, but a re-stimulus of the nervous system to get back to that threshold, to get the patterns we want in the weight room or on the turf. Okay, so that's what we mean by releasing the guard. Now again, then you just kind of over time look at the differences of power. So obviously you have horizontal, vertical, lateral. The horizontal will be the most specific and the most intensified. So if I'm going to do my sequencing at the beginning of a microcycle, and I'm just getting into absorbing force, accepting body weight, I haven't got into the hardcore redirecting force of the back reach run yet. My system isn't ready. My threshold isn't raised yet. I can still be effective at speed drills moving forward. I just got to keep it basic. So that same kind of skip rhythm concept I did to load the ankle joint and the support system, I can do to emphasize my speed drills. So if you look at like a track practice, most of these guys have the threshold, which is why you see the acceleration A skip of just always by default going into that power step, or the absolute speed A skip by default going into that power step. Again, that's track athletes that just by genetic default have a high threshold. But if you have regular people that aren't sprinters, they're just athletes. Like volleyball players don't need to have absolute speed. They just have to have great power genetics. You can still take the concept, maybe do an acceleration A skip with the bounce rhythm. That's not going to be effective for a track athlete because that's so far below their threshold. But for young kids growing, sometimes for lifters that just lift and don't run, those base plyometrics will be effective. And the same thing on the absolute speed. Even if you're not going to run absolute speed, just look at the cyclical mechanic of the leg. There's 6 stretch reflexes going in one single action. So even just coming here, it's not necessarily teaching me a speed drill. It's just a low-grade plyometric with a bunch of stretch reflexes from this position to this position to this position to that position to this position, okay? So that in itself will make the systems more effective. So when I say releasing the guard, many times we can map out our lifts and our runs at the progression level we are at the support system, okay? And I think I'm about up time. So just the overload eccentric load, and then the conclusion is definitely in terms of the specificity. So if you want to be sure at what threshold somebody is, because that's the question I get asked. This all sounds great, but how do you know this guy is above that guy? How do you know? A lot of times it's just a feel of what they look like when they start doing some of these motions. Can they control this and have that hard isometric, or are they doing this by default a lot of times? The other thing is there's no way around this. If you really want to know where somebody is in terms of their threshold, you just have to get them evaluated. And again, I just think that neuromuscular therapy it's not necessarily the best, it's definitely the most specific, because they will go joint by joint through that support system, which is kind of where I got the entire concept from. Good? All right, so we have time for a question, or am I going to cut it now?
Yeah, one question.
All right, one question.
You guys doing any of that warm-up barefoot ever?
The question is a good question. Do we ever do any of this stuff barefoot? The answer is definitely yes, especially at the beginning. So at the beginning, because when you take your shoe off, the shoe is not absorbing any of the force. The force from your muscle action gravity is going directly onto the ground. Now, hence, keep in caution that once you start getting into back reach runs, don't do that stuff barefoot. Maybe at the beginning, half speed, but eventually, you're going to have to get into bending positions with the shoe. The shoe's going to have to get more bending alongside of it because you want to train that as you're going. And you want to get into extreme intensified stuff. So the blanket answer is do it sometimes barefoot at the beginning, but once you start getting into intense stuff, just put your shoes on. But if you can, at all points in times, try to get a shoe that bends, especially at the forefoot. Too many shoes are locking you into a high arch and no forefoot motion. It's severely limiting your ability to train the muscles that are effective. So when you do go into a training shoe, even if it's not where you're going to move, when you put cleats on and move, get a good training shoe that bends. Good?